I've tried several Auth solutions, but this might be the best one that I have ever come across, and it's open source as well, which is absolutely awesome. I'm talking about BetterAuth, no affiliation by the way, but let's find out what makes this the most comprehensive authentication framework for TypeScript and how we can use it to roll our own auth in minutes. Before we get coding, let's get a quick overview of what BetterAuth is, what it supports, and what you can use with it, as it actually has so many features and integrations. It would take me about 12 hours to cover all of these in this video. You can see here on the documentation, it says it's the most comprehensive authentication framework for TypeScript. So if it's for TypeScript, then where can we actually use this? Can we use it in our frameworks like Next? Well, luckily, yes. If we go into the documentation here, click on integrations, you can see you can pretty much use it anywhere that you want. You can use it in Astro, Remix, Next, TanStack Start. On the back end, you have Hono and Express support, and you can even use it on Expo for mobile and desktop too, which is really cool. So you can use it in React Native. Pretty much anywhere that you can write TypeScript, you can probably use BetterAuth. The same actually goes for your databases as well. If we scroll up here, you can see the databases that it supports. It supports MySQL, SQLite, Postgres, Microsoft SQL, and then other relational databases. So it actually supports pretty much all of them thanks to the fact that it supports Keasley here. So you can see some of the community dialects that have been added. So things like Neon here, Cloudflare, PlanetScale, loads and loads that you can use. So you can see very quickly there that you can probably use BetterAuth on any of the applications that you're currently working on or are going to work on. But what can we actually do with BetterAuth? What types of auth is it able to handle? Well, again, pretty much all of them that you're going to need. If we go into the authentication here, you can see it has email and passwords. You can store this in your own databases that we've just seen here. It has Apple sign-on, Discord, Facebook, GitHub, Google, all of the basic ones you'd expect. It then even has Kik, things like Roblox as well, VK, and loads more. The only one I'm seeing that's missing off of this list is Lego. But don't worry, if you do see one that's missing on this list, you can actually use that general oAuth plugin to hook up any provider that supports oAuth 2 protocol or even OpenID Connect flows. There's even single sign-on and OIDC providers for those of you that build for enterprise. So you can already see that it has pretty much everything that you need in an auth framework, but the plugins, wow, this is where it lives up to its name of being the most comprehensive. There's so many, but let me run you through a few of them. For authentication, we have things like two-factor authentication, we have phone number support, magic link support, email one-time password, passkeys, and even one-tap as well. For authorization, you have admin support, so you can actually use this to set up an admin functionality within your apps to manage users, like creating them, banning users, and various things like that. There's API key support as well, so you can manage creating API keys for your application, handing them out and authenticating them, which is super cool to see. And then of course you also have organization support as well to simplify user access and permission management. The utility plugins include things like bearer token authentication, capture support, multi-session, JWT, but my favorite integrations are these third-party ones for Stripe and Polar. You can see in Stripe here, it allows you to integrate Stripe's payment and subscription functionality with BetterAuth. So you can actually do things like creating a customer automatically when a user signs up, managing their subscription plan and pricing, and even processing subscription lifecycle events, all within the BetterAuth framework. That is a massive time saver. So I think you can see that it lives up to its claim of being comprehensive. But let's go ahead and actually see how it is to use in code. How quickly can we get started with implementing BetterAuth in our applications? So for my example here, I've got a demo Next.js application that's built out using some ShadCN components. I've also got a Postgres database at the moment hosted in Docker, and I'm going to be using Drizzle as my ORM for that. Now what I want to do is make it so my dashboard here is authenticated, so a user can't get to this without being logged in. At the moment, we've got some placeholder data down here. I also want to hook up this logout button as well. Once we've got that, I also need to have a way for users to sign up and sign in. So I want a sign up form, a login form, and also a sign in with GitHub option. The first place to start then is in the documentation. I'm going to be following this installation guide that we have here. As you can see, the first thing we need to do is install the package, set up our environment variables, and then create a BetterAuth instance. Now, I'm not actually going to run through the setting up on the installation here, as I'm just going to be following the documentation pretty much line for line. There's a few places in here where it calls out if you're using a different type of database or adapter, and also a framework. But as I said, I'm literally copying all of the code that we have in the installation guide here and seeing how long it takes me. So I'll go ahead and start a timer, and we can see how long it takes to roll your own auth with BetterAuth. And there we go, about 3 minutes later there, I've already set up BetterAuth, I've got the BetterAuth instance running, and I'm ready to actually integrate this into my application. Now there's a few things that I want to point out about the installation process that are super cool. The first one is on step 5, it gives you this super handy command to actually generate the schema for you. So it actually picks up which ORM you're using, or if you're using a SQL server, it will create the migration file, and it handles creating the table schemas for you. You can see what that looks like inside of my code base here. I ran that command to generate our better auth schema. It said, do I want to save it to authschema.ts? I said yes. And as you can see, we got this file here where it sets up our user table, our session table, account table, and also a verification one. So everything that better auth needs to get started, it creates the schema for you. And all I had to do was push this up with Drizzle. The only slight change I made from the documentation was instead of saving it in an authschema.ts at the root level, I moved it inside of my schema folder here, as this is how I have my Drizzle set up to read from that schema folder. There was also a slight change that I had to make to my better auth configuration that I didn't see in the documentation, but for some reason I had to do this to get it working. I had to provide my Drizzle adapter here inside of my better auth config with the schema and then point it to those tables that I just showed you coming from that auth schema file. You might not have to do this, but for some reason I had to set that up. It might be because I moved where that auth schema file actually was. But besides those two minor changes, I followed the installation guide on that documentation, so if you did too, you should have something that looks a little bit like this. Let me run you through some of the key details here. Obviously, we have our better auth configuration, as I said, and I've hooked up my database with that Drizzle adapter. That's going to vary based on what database you're using, of course. Then down here, we actually have the authentication options that I want to use. I've set email and password enabled true. And then in social providers, I've also set up GitHub here. All I need to do is get a client ID and client secret from GitHub, and then I pass those in as environment variables. Once you've got that, all you need to do is make sure you're exporting the auth object that we have here so we can use this around our application to call our endpoints, create users, and do anything that we need inside of BetterAuth. The only other thing to make no auth is we also have an auth client. So this is the one that we're going to be using when we're doing any client-side code. If you're going to be using stuff on the server side, you'll do auth.api, which is in that file that we just saw. If you're doing something on the front end in client code, you'll be using this auth client instead. So the installation step there is super easy and only takes a few minutes, but how about actually implementing this in our application, creating a login, a sign-up flow, and then also getting the user information so we can use it around our application and also protect some of our pages. Well, that part is super easy too. Now for my sign up with email and login with email, I actually used a Next.js server action here. If you're going to be using server actions, you will want to make a change to your authentication configuration. In this better auth config section, we just need to add in a plugin here called Next Cookies. This just handles actually setting the cookies on the browser when you're using server actions. Otherwise, it will get lost in the server and the server itself can't set cookies on the browser. This plugin just handles it all automatically for you. It's a really nice developer experience. Going back to the actions then, just to see what these look like. As you can see, I have my sign up with email server action. I actually have a wrapper around my server actions here called validated action. This is just some of my code that essentially takes in a Zod schema. It's just a generic wrapper. Takes in a Zod schema, validates that we're getting the data that I wanted, otherwise returns an error or returns the data. So all you need to care about is once you have the validated data, in my case an email, password, and name. For the actual BetterAuth code, all we need to do is call auth from our auth.ts file, then .api. Now this part is actually super cool. This is an object that contains all of the endpoints that BetterAuth created for you. In some other libraries that I've used, I actually had to go in and create the auth routes myself, like confirm, login, sign up, and various other ones. In BetterAuth, all you do is create one route.ts with a catch-all, and then you hand off the post and get requests to the Next.js handler, passing through your auth configuration, and it handles the setup of all of the endpoints for you, which is a super nice developer experience. Getting back to it then, all we need to do is call sign up with email, pass through the body, email, password, and name, and then redirect to the dashboard once we know that they are logged in and signed up. Same thing with the login down here. It's a validated action, so we're just wrapping my schema that takes in an email and password here. We get that validated, and then we can just say sign in with email, again, body, email, and password. So it's literally like 2 or 3 lines of code to sign up with email and sign in. And again, we redirect them to the dashboard. I'll quickly show you the code on the forms themselves as well. So we're using a use action state here since we're using a server action. I call my action of login email, and then I simply just have the form tied up to that action. So this is the login form that takes in the email, the name, the password, and various other things. And I do that both for my login form here and my sign up form. I'll actually leave this code linked down below. With those server actions created then and the forms linked up, we should be able to use the sign up page now. So I'll put in the name of Better James, use an email here, and then type in a password. If we click sign up, we should now be redirected to the dashboard if everything has worked. There we go, we can see that everything's worked, so I should have created a user now. And you can see that down here, we're actually loading in that information. It's got the name that I signed up with and also the email. And I can also go and log out now. And we should see that takes me back to the login page. Now, if I try to go to /dashboard, I should be redirected straight back to /login since we logged out. And now I can go ahead and log into that account that we just created. I somehow forgot the password for that one already, so I created another account to test this. So let's log in with this one. As you can see, we should be taken to the dashboard now. And again, we're loading in that user information. So how is that bit done? Back in the code then, you saw that our login flow was working, but I didn't actually show you how I managed to make sure that the dashboard page is protected and how we load in the user information. I do that in my dashboard page.tsx here, since this is a server component. Since it's a server component, I can go ahead and say session equals oAuth.api.getSession, pass through the Next.js headers, and that will get us a session. If we don't have a session, we're not authenticated, so we can redirect them to /login. If we do have a session, we should have a user, and then we can get the information like the ID, name, email, various other things, and then I just pass that through to my sidebar, which has the logout button. The code for logging out is super simple, but it's worth noting this one is a client component. So this time I called our auth client, and then I just said .sign out. I passed through some fetch options, so on success, so if we've successfully signed out, go ahead and redirect the user to /login. The final thing that I wanted then was sign in with GitHub. That one is super easy. Again, this one's being done in a client component this time. On the button that says sign in with GitHub, all I have is an on-click that just has authclient.signin.social. And then in the options for this, we just pass through the provider that we want for this button, which in my case, as I said, is GitHub. That's all the code that we need to sign in with GitHub. Let's check that that's working. I'll click sign in with GitHub here. You can see it did a flow, it redirected me, and then it took me back to localhost 3000. So it looks like I need to change the callback URL, but I should be able to get to the dashboard now. Yep, typing in the URL manually, you can see that we are logged in as we can get to the dashboard, and it's loading in my GitHub user information. Looks like all I had to do in my signin.social was provide a callback URL to /dashboard, and now this is working as I expected. There we go, that is just a brief overview of BetterAuth. As I said, it has so many features. This would be a 12-hour video if I was showing you all of them in depth. It has everything that you need for an authentication framework in TypeScript. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Subscribe, and as always, see you in the next one.